So those laws help keep people employed who otherwise would not have been. Generally, the times we're talking about were prosperous, even though your book will, I believe your book, this book states that 1/3 of Americans during Eisenhower's 8 years living in poverty. Harry Truman saw that he did not have a chance to win in 1952, so he didn't run, on the grounds that nobody could have flipped Eisenhower. Eisenhower was extremely popular and everybody knew he was going to win. The Democrats put up Adlai Stevenson. They ran Stevenson 2 times against Ike. Ike had this winning personality and winning smile and maintained something of a grandfather image. This time he was something of an old man. Ike ran on a promise of if elected, I will go to Korea. He was elected. He went to Korea while he was still president-elect. He had no power to act, but nevertheless, he at least went to Korea like he said he would do. And in short order, he brought the boys home. He ended the Korean War with a truce. Now,
The Korean War ended in a truce?
it was a truce that was to last more than 60 years. The truce just ended like a week or two ago, when North and South Korea finally decided they were through fighting. The president of North and South Korea met on the border, and the president of South Korea crossed the border into North Korea legally, walked across, and the president of North Korea, Kim Jong, walked across to South Korea, again legally. Two sides.
The truce is over.
The truce is over, the war is over.
The war is over, just ended last week.
Just ended about a week, that's right. Now, I don't know how long it'll last. I mean, time will tell, but officially. But see, because up until now, I was always teaching the war is still going on. But now, supposedly now the war is over. We had a truce. Anyway, the Korean War ended. Now, I want to say this about what's happened when Eisenhower was running for president. He had a nice, smooth, easy campaign of it, except for one glitch. Something that he did not foresee, did not expect. He ran with a vice president named Richard Milhous Nixon. And anyone who runs with Nixon is going to have a glitch in his campaign. I mean, Ike was no exception. Ike didn't know. See, in September of 1952, 2 months before the election, Eisenhower's smooth campaign ran into its one and only bump.
Vice President of who?
His vice president was candidate. Running with him was Richard Nixon.
Who's Vice President?
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower.
Okay. Yeah, Eisenhower was running for president in 1952. It was Ike. And his vice president running with him was Richard Nixon. Now, you all know that Richard Nixon later became president himself. But Richard Nixon had stashed away $18,000 in a secret slush fund. This was money that had been donated to him that he had put in a bank. And suppose it was to help other Republicans. Now, if this doesn't sound so bad to you, it doesn't really either. But what makes it look bad is the kind of thing that it just has a bad look to it. Why did he keep it so secret? And then when it was found out about, he and his wife and daughters just went into a state of melancholy. Now, what he was supposed to do, when something like that, he was supposed to, he had a private line directly to Ike. He was supposed to call Ike, or Ike was supposed to call him. What happened? Ike didn't call Nixon, so Nixon didn't call Ike. It was like Ike knew that something was bad, and Ike said to the world, Nixon's going to have to come clean. Well, Ike called Nixon to meet him in a certain town, I believe in Montana, where Ike was going to be anyway. And Nixon then, of course, being called, he had to go to that town and meet with him. But before he did, Nixon got on national TV, such as it was back then. He gave a speech called the famous Checker speech. In his speech, he told about, he said, here's a check. This check I did not cash. I will never cash it. This check was given to me by G.I. G.I.'s wife. Her husband is serving in Korea. And she said, Mr. Nixon, I know this is not much, but that's the least I can afford to give you. Please accept this as my gift to your cause and to your campaign. He said, I cannot cash this check. And he said, if I have ever taken a gift that I shouldn't have taken, I will give it back. But there's one gift I will never give back, and that's the Cocker Spaniel that was given to my 2 little daughters named Checkers. And at that point, Richard Nixon just broke down on national TV and boom. Well, he got a lot of sympathy. He was supposed to give the name and address they could call if they supported him, but he never got around to it. Instead, the cameras turned off of him, and he never did give the name and address. But all of a sudden, people started telegramming to Ike's campaign, don't dump him, don't dump him, don't dump him, over and over. Now, Eisenhower was a general, and he had been a general. He was always asking for advice, just like Washington was, a lot of good generals would do. So he asked his political advisors, what should we do about this? This political advisor, hey, keep the man on your ticket. Getting rid of him could really do you a lot of harm. He's obviously pretty popular. He's got the sympathy of the country. Keep him on. So when I met Nixon there in Montana, Nixon's first words were, hey, sir, you didn't have to do this. But Ike said, yes, I did. Come here, you're my boy. And the two of them kind of made up from that day till this. I mean, till the end of their lives. Ike and Nixon were suspicious of each other. Nixon developed a hatred of the press that never went away. This was one of the crises that Nixon went through. He described in his book, Six Crises. Now, there have been persons who have said that this secret slush fund was actually legal if it would have gone to help Republicans who were in trouble. But was it going to his own pockets, or was it going to help Republicans? And this we'll never know.
Well, did it go to people? I mean, would have been worth it.
I think because of the publicity it got, that Nixon wound up spending it on his campaign to be reelected vice president, right? And basically he spent it. That's what I really think happened. But it was hidden away, supposedly to help fellow Republicans, but just the secrecy of it just kind of made it kind of look bad. Like I say, Nixon never did like the press from that day to this, and Nixon and Eisenhower. It's true that Nixon's daughter married Eisenhower's grandson, and the two of them pretended to be friends, but actually there was a rift between them and never was quite healed. All right, Nixon went on to become vice president. Eisenhower was strong enough a candidate to overcome something like that, so Eisenhower overcame it. But Nixon never forgot the incident. The rest of the country did for a while until Nixon came back into view. The reason I mention it is because Nixon was going to get involved in many more shenanigans. Now, to show you something about what kind of man Nixon was, when Nixon was running against a woman named Voorhis for Congress, before he got to be run for vice president, he had a habit of calling his opponents a communist. Years later, he said, I knew all along she was not a communist, but hey, I had the election to win. And sure, she was not a communist, and he knew it, but he was gonna, he played dirty. Nixon was a dirty leader. I mean, hey. Then again, no, Nixon was never impeached. All right, now, there have been two presidents who were impeached. Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton. Now, the reason Nixon was not impeached was...
He was almost impeached, though.
He was going to be. In other words, he was certain. See, they couldn't impeach because he had this... All right, it takes 2/3 of senators. But basically, if he had 34 senators on his side, and they knew they couldn't turn him out. Now, in the case of Clinton, they went ahead and tried it anyway, and they failed. But in the case of Nixon, he had 34 senators on his side. They couldn't impeach him. But then, when the right tapes were released, he had tape when that showed him to be pretty well guilty. He had 20 senators on his side. They were going to impeach him, but he resigned.
He resigned before
they could. Before they had a chance to impeach him, he resigned. He would never have survived an impeachment hearing. The House was certain to impeach him, and the Senate was certain to remove him from office.
He would have been.
He would have been impeached. Yeah,
he
certainly would have been. I mean, we know that now. But see, he had a following. He had 25% of American people solidly behind him throughout war, up until the last minute.
Is this because of Watergate?
It was because of Watergate, yeah. But he always had this 25% who, and let me tell you something now. I'll jump ahead. Your book is as kind to Nixon as anyone I've ever seen is, the authors of your book. They said that they talk about how great President Nixon was and how much good he did, how he opened up the door for trade with China, how he ended the war in Vietnam, and all this good stuff. Then when it came to Watergate, what Nixon did at Watergate was what every Cold War president since Truman had done. That Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson had all done a lot of the same things and gotten away with it. With Nixon, he got caught.
He got caught. So that was the problem. Yeah, he got caught. And I'll have more to say about it later, but I'm mentioning it now. I mean, if Nixon did not become president, this would all be forgotten about. I mean, but he did become president later. All right, well, anyway,
Eisenhower's administration is known for its general prosperity and its general tranquility. In other words, rather peaceful time of it.
Tranquility and what?
Peaceful, tranquility, and in other words, there were not a lot of student unrest. Now, what there was, though, there was a lot of racial unrest. Now, during Ike's term, and this folk I heard this morning, I don't know what place it is, there was a young black man named Emmett Till who was murdered. All you black people probably heard the story, Emmett Till. Very famous story. And Emmett Till was murdered, and they found his body eventually. He was thrown into a creek and weighted down with some heavy weights to drown him. Emmett Till was murdered because he supposedly whistled at a white woman, and someone even carried it farther and said he made dirty remarks of a sexual nature to a white woman. Emmett Till was a young black man. Emmett Till was living in Chicago, and they warned him. Now you go see, he was visiting relatives because a lot of his relatives were still living in Mississippi. They warned him, now here you can't do like you do in Chicago. He instead supposedly allegedly whistled at a white woman and talked a little bit dirty to this white woman, and he was killed. The case is about to be reopened. This is the point I'm trying to make. I heard that on the
How
radio.
long ago did this case happen?
It happened in 1958. In other words, long ago, 60 years ago. Yeah, 60 years ago. That 60-year-old case is about to be reopened. Now, when the case got to the federal government, I mean, the case was so big it actually got to the president's office. I mean, it went to the attorney general, and the attorney general passed it on to Eisenhower. Eisenhower decided we're not going to pursue it. Okay, the case. Yeah, Ike said that. Yeah. Again, the Southern jury found all the accused not guilty. And then the accused wound up all but confessing later. But according to the Constitution, a person can't be tried twice for the same crime, even though there is a clause. Yeah, there is a clause in the Constitution, may not, but in the court, it says if significant new evidence is found, a person can be tried twice. And that's why the Emmett Till case is supposedly about to be reopened. Now, I heard that this morning. Anyway, the Emmett Till case, what I'm saying, there were race riots.
What was the evidence brought?
I don't know. I just heard it on the radio, and again, I was busy, driving and all that. But I don't know any more details than what I told you, except the case that I thought about. See, some years ago, they showed a movie here about Emmett Till and I watched it. It was shown in the theater here. And I was between classes, and then I watched the whole thing.
He was also a kid, too, right?
A what?
He was young.
He was quite young. Yeah, he was a teenager. Yeah, he was a
Yeah.
kid, yeah. About, I mean, 16 or 17, yeah, quite young.
So men like went
Yeah.
to his house.
Like I said, it seems like every black person has heard of it. Anyway, Emmett Till was murdered, and Eisenhower would not pursue the case. But there were race riots that occurred. But otherwise, it was a tranquil time and mostly a prosperous time. Now, what I remember of it, for the first time what I remember of it was the country went through one crisis after another. The idea was we're going to carry the Soviets to the brink of war. It's called brinkmanship. Another idea was containment. We're going to contain communism where it is. Let it stay where it is, but not let it expand. So they tried to contain it. We'd go to the brink of war, and we had a crisis, well, for maybe 2 or 3 weeks to be crisis in Korea. Eventually, Korea would die down into Berlin. Then Berlin would die down and it would be Lebanon. Lebanon would die down into the Congo. Then Cuba came up, and for weeks you heard about Cuba. And Vietnam came up, and I thought Vietnam would die down in a few months, but instead Vietnam lasted 12 years. But there was one crisis after another. These crises would make news for a few weeks, then die down. Another would come up and die down. Come up and then die down. That was a lot of Eisenhower's administration. One crisis after another. Anyway, now here is something that happened. I mean, Stalin died, and eventually Khrushchev wormed everybody out and became the premier, and Khrushchev was the premier for 12 years, Soviet Union. And when I was a kid, the girls would get mad at another girl and say, "You like Nikita Khrushchev." Nikita Khrushchev was a warty old fraud. I mean, just put it in blunt terms. But or they'd say to each other, when one girl would be accused of liking, they said, "That is pure propaganda," because a lot was going on in the Cold War was propaganda. And pure propaganda was another name for half-truth. But one incident I want to mention. A young pilot named Francis Gary Powers was flying a U-2.
What's the name?
Powers was his name. Francis Gary Powers. He was flying U-2 over the Soviet Union. And his U-2 plane somehow had to land inside Russia. Now, we were told it had been shot down, and Eisenhower believed that the pilot was dead. I mean, okay, we lost the pilot. So Eisenhower said, no, he was not flying a reconnaissance mission. We don't know why he was there. He's drifted. He was probably trying to defect. He was not spying for us. And then the next thing you know, guess what? After Eisenhower had lied outright, the Soviets showed on TV, here's Francis Gary Powers. The man was very much alive, not even hurt. And this was a terrible embarrassment to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower at that point was forced to admit that, well, we sent him on a spy mission, but hey, it was justifiable. Now again, it made the United States look bad, but when you're Eisenhower, or you're dealing with a man like Khrushchev, everything you do is wrong. We had every reason to want to spy on him, and we were spying on him. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. And again, I think along with that, the spying was justified, and if I had been in Eisenhower's shoes, I might have done the same thing he did. I mean, after all, I assumed that the young man was dead, and then to find out he was alive. To make a long story short, Powers was to remain in prison for a couple of years, but then we had a spy that we had caught, a Russian spy, so one day we exchanged. The cartoon Times showed the trading pawn for pawn. We exchanged Powers for Abel. Abel was a Russian man's name. We got Powers back and debriefed him. Eventually, Powers was killed in an airplane crash. Again, this was another incident. And now there was another incident too. Right after this episode, Khrushchev and the President of France and Eisenhower and the Prime Minister of Britain were to meet at what's called a summit conference. We're going to have these four men get together, Khrushchev and the leader of England, the leader of France and the United States, and they're going to meet at the conference. So they met to discuss world peace, but the conference blew up. Khrushchev wanted to apologize for the Powers incident, and I turned to his Secretary of State, Dulles, and said, we might have, no, Herter. He said, we might apologize. I said, no, we don't have to apologize for this. Don't. So we didn't. Finally, Khrushchev said to Eisenhower, your country needs a president who, like Roosevelt, who understands foreign policy better than you do. And I got up and walked out. The summit conference was blown up. Now, there was another episode that occurred shortly after this called the kitchen debates. All right, here's the story of the kitchen debates. Again, all this went on when I was a child.
What chapter is that in?
I think the kitchen debate, all right, I told you I was on, let's see, it's a chapter on, it's 27, Politics of Culture and Abundance. Now, let me look that up, because they have a very, let's see, kitchen debate.
We have the baby boomer.
Yeah,
It's not in the index.
it's not in the index. Ooh. All right. Now.
Yeah, it's not in here. I look.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Okay, then I'm going to leave it out.
Cross that out.
Yeah, let's see. No, it's not. Okay, I'm a little bit surprised, but you're right, it's not in there. Okay, I'm confused with the other book. It was in the other book. I'm going to leave it off. Essentially, I mean, what Nixon did was he went to Russia and carried with him a kitchen, American kitchen, and Khrushchev's people were not living near that high, and Khrushchev really got upset and blew up in Nixon's face. And Nixon called it one of his crises, and Nixon felt like he'd been calm during the crisis.
Eventually, the two men apologized to each other. Nixon said, if I've offended you. But all Nixon was doing was showing off in the American kitchen. Anyway, the 8 years of Eisenhower went by with a few race riots, hardly any college or campus riots. And then the 8 years ended. And in 1960, for the second time, the country ran a Roman Catholic. Now, we had run a Roman Catholic before. Al Smith had run in 1928 against Herbert Hoover. But John Kennedy was the first and so far the only Roman Catholic who's ever been elected president. And a lot of people made this an issue. Now, folks, again, not to in any way promote anti-Catholicism, but I have to state, because it's an American history class, anti-Catholicism has been a part of American history down to the 80s. From the colonial times up until...
Protestants country. Really
We're a Protestant country, that's right. But nevertheless, there's been, before the Civil War, there was a party that was dedicated to anti-Catholicism, the Know Nothing Party. And then the Ku Klux Klan. You all know, I'm sure, the Ku Klux Klan was against blacks. They also were against
Anyone who wasn't them?
Jews and Catholics. And foreigners. Jews, Catholics, and foreigners of all kinds. Yeah, anyone who wasn't them. They wanted for white Protestants. Folks, and again, this is a historical fact. But Kennedy's Catholicism was an issue at the time. Now, I'm going to make the election short. I mean, it was a long campaign. I was 11 years old. I will remember it. And we were hoping, my family hoping that Nixon would win. And folk, we all believe now that Nixon actually won the election. That the election was stolen from Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon could have had a recount of a certain county in Illinois that was closed. But John Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, rigged some votes. Now this is now established. I mean, if you don't believe it, look it up. It is now established. Rigged some votes in favor of his son. Joseph Kennedy told his son, John, listen, I'm not going to buy you a landslide. I'm going to buy you the election. I'm not going to buy you a landslide. I'm not going to spend that much money. I'm going to risk it all. Anyway, the election was stolen. But it featured for the first time the two men getting together and debating, Kennedy and Nixon in a debate. The persons who heard the debate only on the radio, the majority of them said Nixon won. But the persons who saw the debate on TV, the majority of them said Nixon lost the debates. Here's what happened. Among other things, Kennedy dressed in a dark suit that on black and white, in those days, 95% of American TVs were black and white. That dark suit, and Nixon dressed in a gray suit that didn't show up hardly at all. And if you would have been looking at it, you would have seen this man in the dark and this other man who looked like a ghost. The man who looked like a ghost was Richard Nixon. Also, John Kennedy had enough sense to look at the lens of the camera, and guess what? The American people got the impression he is looking right at us. Richard Nixon was looking everywhere else but the camera. I mean, what sort of time looking at the camera? John Kennedy was looking at the camera, and Nixon was looking away. That hurt him. All told, the debate really, Richard Nixon admitted later himself, oh yeah, Eisenhower was one of the few men who would get on TV, and because he was a big guy, and he would not allow himself to be made up. Richard Nixon thought, I'll follow Ike. Kennedy was made up heavily. Kennedy's features showed up, Nixon's was pale. But I could get away with it again. Nixon could not. But also, I just read this past week, I've heard it before. Kennedy had a doctor who was a quack doctor who pumped him up with painkillers. And this made Kennedy have more poise than he otherwise would have had. Johnson, who had been running against Kennedy as a Democrat, Johnson tried to tell the country that Kennedy was very poor, in very poor health. But nobody would listen to him. Anyway, now Kennedy's health, again, was extremely bad, but this doctor, the code name for him was Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood would pump him up with amphetamines, painkillers, which really in the long run did Kennedy a lot of harm. But it helped him in the debate. Anyway, Nixon, thanks to his father stealing the election, Nixon
lost the election. I mean, thanks to Kennedy's father stealing the election. Kennedy won the election and became the
Is
president.
his father president as well?
What's that?
Is his father like secretary?
No,
of
all right,
state?
here's the problem. Joseph Kennedy wanted to be president, but he had shorted the market, and that hurt him. I mean, you know, it's because it put millions of people out of work and led to depression. Everybody knows, I mean, this is not hearsay, that he shorted the market the day before the big market crash. He went, I mean, you know, he went in and sold all the stock when the price went down because he and his buddies, they all
Insider
bought it.
trading.
Yeah, double trading. But this, and also, when he went to England to be, Roosevelt made him ambassador to Great Britain. He went to, and he kept promoting peace between, because it's almost like he was for Hitler and for Mussolini, just like Father Conway. I mean, after all, Italy was a Catholic country. All right, so he was, and then Roosevelt decided, I'm just going to bypass him, and finally, Joseph Kennedy resigned and came home because Roosevelt was not even using it anymore. Again, because he was siding with Hitler and Mussolini, and finally Roosevelt had enough of him, so Roosevelt wouldn't even deal with it anymore, wouldn't even talk to him. So Joseph Kennedy had ruined himself. He thought, I'm going to make sure my son gets in. So he lived long enough to see, he had 4 sons. The oldest one was killed in World War II. He lived long enough to see 3 of his sons dead and the 4th was disgraced. And he died. Anyway, shortly after John Kennedy took office, Joseph Kennedy had a debilitating stroke. And he was to remain in very bad health the rest of his life. Unable to feed himself, unable hardly to talk.
When his father sent that vote of Jews back to Europe, the rabbi that cursed the family that all of them should die an unnatural death. And since then,
This
every
story
single
has
one of
been
them
told. This story has been told.
Every single one of them since then has all died of unnatural deaths. One died in a helicopter crash, one died in a plane crash, died of cancer. All of them
And
died of unnatural
John
deaths.
Kennedy's son died in a plane nose dive.
That's what I'm saying. They all dying unnatural deaths.
But the daughter died in a plane crash, one of the daughters.
Yeah.
Joseph Kennedy's son. And one of the daughters was a mentally retarded where they did a lobotomy on her.
All of them will
And she
die
became a vegetable.
unnaturally or have
Uh,
problems.
And in the case of poor old Edward, he didn't die.
He was shot in the head.
But Edward was disgraced. Edward was a public disgrace.
He was shot in the head.
John was shot in the head, and so was Robert was shot, but Edward was disgraced. And anyways, the thing about Edward's disgrace, he was caught with this 19-year-old girl in his car, Mary Jo Peckney, and she had, if he reported accident, there was plenty of time because she was breathing for hours with an air bubble that was on the top of the car. And she died breathing until she ran out of oxygen. But here's the thing about that. That episode occurred the same time that the first moon landing was occurring, which meant everybody was tuned to the radio and TV, and all the news was about the astronauts. Whoops, but now we interrupt this moon shot to tell you, Edward Kennedy has been found with a girl in his car, and the girl is dead. 19-year-old Mary Jo Peckney. He couldn't have picked a worse time for it to happen to him. Edward Kennedy went home and said to his dad, Dad, I promise it was an accident. Edward Kennedy lost his license and lost every chance he had to become president of the United States. The state of Massachusetts kept electing him a senator, but he could never become president of the United States after that. The American people wouldn't have it. Anyway, now, John Kennedy, I've already mentioned his health was really, really bad. Well, how I remember of him in office, he was pictured as a good family man, but, man who was madly in love with his wife, and he had 2 children. There was a 3rd child born, and probably was in the White House, but that child was not there. Anyway, I'll start with the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs.
Wasn't that Cuba?
Yeah, now the Bay of Pigs, with all fairness to John Kennedy, had been started by Eisenhower. The idea was we're going to invade Cuba and take it from Castro. Well, President Kennedy promised the invaders, now once you get there to Cuba, I'm going to support you with air support. As all of you may know, the invaders got to the Bay of Pigs, and John Kennedy got cold feet.
And the Cuban people living in Miami have held that against him to this very day. I've talked to some of them, and some of them in my class have talked to others. The Cuban people living there in Miami are still mad at him for that because he promised them support and reneged on it. Why? Incompetence, for one thing. It was a really black mark on his beginning of his ministry, and it started him off bad, and it was one of the things that initially kept him from being part of the top 5. Now, Kennedy's plan to run the country amounted to socialism. He was going to make the country more and more socialistic, but he had a real problem. He couldn't get his legislation passed.